and this. Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning.
First of all, I would like to say a very warm welcome to all of you who come here on a Sunday morning at 11 a.m. For this talk with this nice weather outside. I'm very happy that Kader Attia is here, despite the COVID-19 traveling restrictions. I am Mirjam Varadinis. I'm a curator here at Kunsthaus Zurich for contemporary art, and Kader and I, we organized the current show exhibition, Remembering the Future, here in the museum. And first, Kader and I will have a conversation, let's say, about his show, his work, for about 45 minutes, and then we will open up to the audience, also for questions. So if you have anything that you want to ask Kader, please take advantage of this moment, and we will have microphones that will pass through the audience. I also wanted to inform you that this talk is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube, and so it's also uploaded there afterwards, so in case you want to re-listen to some parts, you may do so. Okay, Kader, you arrived here like 2 days ago for a very special occasion and reason. Namely, it was to install a new permanent sculpture in front of the museum. Some of you who came here might have seen it already. It's called Janus Janus, and it is a double-headed figure that was placed on a round pedestal that is just next to the Rodin's Gates of Hell. On top of this round pedestal, there was, for almost half a century, I guess, there was a sculpture by Lipschitz sitting on top on this plinth. And because of the constructions going on in relation to the extension building we're building on the other side, we had to take it down, the sculpture. But the plinth remained. So we were wondering what to do with these plinths, and amongst the colleagues in the Kunsthaus, we had a discussion, and we felt that this is really an interesting occasion, let's say, to not just simply put back the Lipschitz sculpture, but to ask a contemporary artist to add like a contemporary voice also on this part of the square where the historical building is, while the new building is on the other side. And kind of a contemporary update. And it was important for us also to give, let's say, to use an artistic voice that would give a platform to reflect on really urgent topics of our times, and also to question the Western white canon that is represented mainly like inside but also outside the museum. And I had proposed then Kader Attia as an artist, as I felt that he would have both, let's say, the formal strength and also a conceptual poignancy to do this project. And I just think it would be really interesting, Kader, if you could let us know a bit the history of this sculpture and also of who these two faces are and how you came to this idea. There's one is an African soldier, and the other one is a German or a soldier. So I think it's interesting if you could just like, let's say a bit about your thoughts about how you came up with this concept. You see sometimes also one image here floating by in the back of this sculpture.
Thank you, Mirjam, and good morning to everyone here and on YouTube, because you said there's a live stream, so hello, internet. To make a long story short, the project of this sculpture has been, for me, influenced by, I would say, on the one side, a long series of researches I've been doing the last more than 10 years on the relation between the injury and the repair. And on the other hand, when I visited the exhibition, the permanent collection here, I was very, very struck by the fact that along the whole walk you can have between the old building here and which was built in the 19th century and the new one, and the second one, sorry, which was built in the 50s, you had the feeling that, I don't know, there was a kind of prosthetic that was, I mean, sort of, yeah, repairing a kind of absence of a significant moment of art history, because when you walk through the collection, visiting the collection, the permanent collection, you go through from the Renaissance to the 19th century, and then suddenly you are surrounded with Giacometti works and, I mean, modern artists, and you feel that the building also has changed. I've been very much interested for many years on the fact that modern art, the way it has been represented in institutions, has always been at some point denying the influence from old art from Africa, basically, even though Picasso and Braque have been clearly talking about this. And because I did a lot of research in collections also, I discovered that contrary to other museums here, they were not a wooden object, you know, from basically from the past of Africa. What we called properly, I think, ancient art from Africa, because I don't like these primitive and tribal art terminologies. And for me, it was a kind of, it reminded me a project that I've been working for many years in Dakar, in Senegal, because when I started to work for the Documenta 19 on the repair, I really wanted to find sort of mirror between the material I was using and the topics I was talking about. So it's a bit long story, but it's important to understand how I came into how I became interested by these injured faces soldiers. First, I discovered that objects which were, traditional objects and from everyday life to the holy object, which were used in non-Western societies and have been, let's say, non-modern societies, because it's not only non-Western, have been repaired in a very, significant way. So the injury has been sometimes stitched with strings or staples, giving to the object which was broken, which was dead, actually, a new life. So I have been very interested by this, and for me, the way that the World War I soldiers came back home after the war, let's talk about, I think it's about 6.5 million of soldiers who worldwide who have to go back home with injured faces. Les gueules cassées, we call them in French, in English, broken faces. I mean, all the countries involved in World War I had this, after the war, the traces of the war, which was visible in the street, etc. And for me, these objects were like, I don't know how, maybe in a Warburgian way or Georges Bataille way, I was very struck by the relation we could make between this broken object and this faces object. Because on the one hand, the broken object, which has been repaired in non-modern societies, have been, again, highlighting the injury as a part of a new life of the object. On the other hand, the broken faces of the soldiers were so much taken care of by the doctors, by the surgeon in France, Hippolyte Morestin and Suzanne Noël, in Germany, in Berlin, Dr. Joseph. The whole scientist field of plastic surgery was born in that moment. And this, how do you call this technically? Maxillofacial injuries were like a core stake of this sort of race for modernism, you know, for modernization of science. Like if there was a parallel war between. So I was fascinated by the fact that the more I was doing the researches on these soldiers, on these injured soldiers, everywhere, for a war that lasts 4 years, which is very long, I was really struck by the fact that all doctors, allies, enemies, they were obsessed by erasing the injuries. They were obsessed by reenacting the face of the soldiers using sometimes very rough system, which recalled the calabashes repair, the mask. So even the nurses in France, because something we have to say, of course, especially today, most of the people who were taking care of the soldiers injured in the middle of the battlefield were women and young women. So they were stitching the face of the in an amount of dead body. There was one guy who was screaming, and they used to go under the bombs and repair immediately with what they had, the faces. Then when they had the chance to go to the hospital, and again along this very long process of the repair of these very early morning plastic surgery, the doctor were obsessed by erasing the injuries. And I think this is a crucial moment in my own researches that helped me to continue to first to understand that the repair is not only the repair, the injury is correlative to the repair. It's like when we think the reparation, we cannot evacuate the injury. There is always the injury somewhere. The reparation is an oxymoron. It turns in loop forever. And the reason sometimes I'm showing injuries, I'm addressing the repair in this looping process. So when I found out that there was this missing part of the history of African art in the modern collection, and that I'm not saying that museums should acquire other objects from old art from Africa, but I was just thinking that how much we need to reveal and to tribute this, but not that like also in a very obvious way, like celebrating a sculpture representing a tirailleur Senegalais or white soldiers. I was very, for me, when you think about also a work that is supposed to stay for a while outside, I started to question the fact that the representation of, it started like that. I remember that I was very struck by the fact that whether in France, although in France, the broken faces were celebrated as heroes, in Germany, they were not at all. It was difficult to find archives, very difficult. I find few archives in Frankfurt Historisches Museum, though in France, I found a lot of them. So for me, the idea of representing a hero of the First World War was not necessarily to represent a beautiful figure on a horse or whatsoever in this very obscene political way of manipulating the memory of the war. I wanted to show the injury, but more than this, I also wanted to show this untold story that the colonial context of that time has provided millions of soldiers from basically the French, the German, and the British armies. The German did not involve their soldiers, which were part of the Africa units. They made them fight in Tanzania, in Togo, in Cameroon, in their colonies. But they had tirailleurs. They were called askari. The French brought them to the front, and of course they sent them very close to the hell. And we never had heard that, for instance, and this is what I attended in my research, is that there were injured faces African. I found really few of them. And for me, it was concerning. I didn't understand why there were so few. But then it became obvious because they have all died in the front. Yeah. So for me, it was interesting to first, especially today, to show a hero, someone who has been not celebrated at all because he was African. We can also then talk about this inequality in the army. But at the same time, I also wanted to build, and I will finish by this because it's very important, Janus hero, because what I'm also trying to get rid of it is the celebration of one single person, as sometimes unknown, which is much more easy to instrumentalize in terms of memory. Now you have an ambivalence of the white soldier, the German one, who was also injured faces, and the African one, who was an injured faces soldiers.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there were like, I think, more than 300,000 soldiers coming from the colonies, from these like Senegalese that died in World War I. So that's why you have, I think, less as you say, photographs and traces of those. But what I think is really interesting about this, of course, we live in a moment when so many monuments are being dismantled that kind of symbolize also the violence, the colonial violence and exploitation. And what is interesting now to have this sculpture here with this, as you clearly say, these two faces, which I think is also really important, because then you don't, because normally a monument is just for one person or like one event basically, and celebrating this one person or this one event, but it's all kind of entangled and parallel like conditions, and so it's like a plural voices already that you have in this double-sided figure. And I think that was also very important for you, that you don't want to have just one, as you said, like one one figure. So it's been I think a shift also now from these wooden objects that you did so far, working with these archives, where you would choose some photographs and then do a kind of a model, and then go with this model that you do. You go to Senegal, and then you create this kind of wooden sculpture where you use also wood that is a century old, like almost like this.
Because of the ring, we can calculate the age of a tree.
Exactly. So it's like almost the same time as the First World War is like dating back. So, and what was now the translation, let's say, to the outside and this other material for you? What does this mean somehow for you?
For sure, we could not do it in wood outside. And then I would say that in an artwork, of course, you have so many ways to read it, so many layers, and also so many chronologies. And when you walk outside, you need to take care of that. You cannot evacuate the fact that the perception of this might change with time. And here I also refer to something that has influenced me a lot. Is a movie by Abel Gance called J'accuse. And after the World War I, there was a very significant peace movement everywhere in Germany. Even in Berlin, they had the Antikriege Museum. It was very strong, this Pacific movement. Abel Gance was part of it. In 1919, I think, he started to write a film which was criticizing the war, and clearly a Pacific film and Pacific statement. He went to visit broken faces soldiers to ask them to perform in his film. And they have all refused because they were ashamed of showing their face. So there is one version of J'accuse where you have soldiers that have makeup and looks like dead people at the end. But in 1936, if I'm not wrong, please excuse me if I'm wrong with the date, Abel Gance was so much worried about the rise of fascism in Europe that he said, we need to address another version of J'accuse, and we need to show what is the war, because the mankind is going back to that shit. He went back to visit the soldiers, many of them were older, etc. Many of them have died. But the one who remains, he asked them, you need to be part of my film, because we need to show what is the war. And they have accepted. So there is a second version of J'accuse from 1938, I think, where at the end you have this prophetic person who is like screaming in front of the cemeteries that the human beings became mad, they want to do the war again. And you have this crowd who want to sacrifice him. And slowly, with a very expressionist smooth effect, you see those bodies coming out of the grave. But if you look carefully at the image, you have real broken faces, I mean, injured faces, people who are like acting. I found this so important. I mean, for me, this is really the reason also that I'm not showing the injury in a romantic way. I'm also doing it ethically. I think we are living in a world where we are slightly, not slowly, unfortunately, I used to say slowly 5 years ago, but we're sliding into a very fascistic context, authoritarian one, and we have to remember what means the authoritarian regime, regimes also, by the way, because then they get in war, and who are the victim, the people, the civilians. So for me, it's the gesture also of reminding that we are not living in a world where pinky and glossy and things like that I don't want to be delusional anymore, and I really think that when we need to address a statement with the problematic of time, I think that, and not only in sculpture, basically, I think even this moment that we share together is part of it. I think we need to build experiences that open our minds and create conversations as well.
Well, I think this is also very visible in the exhibition. Now we talk about this gueule cassée of the First World War, but there's a new work that you did where you show new broken faces, the injured demonstrators that are very recent, basically, that are all where you see the violence, the police violence on the body in contemporary society. And I think this is very important, this kind of, this combination of a historical perspective, this layer of history, but then it's also to reflect on the contemporary condition. And then, I mean, you're not talking only about the gueule cassée of the First World War, but you're talking about the now. That's very important. So maybe you can say something a bit more about this new work with these injured faces from the different, like
the demonstration.
The demonstration, yeah.
I mean, I think there is unfortunately a sort of continuum between repression of yesterday and authoritarian processes of yesterday. The broken faces, they were victims of the states who were doing the war, as well as the tirailleurs Senegalese. We have been attending for the last, I would say, 9 years now, because I'm referring to the Arab Spring, to an incredible repressive shift into, in terms of the so-called democratic dialogue that should exist between the people and the power. And really, the Arab Spring for me is the best example. In the Arab Spring, for instance, in Cairo, there used to be hackers who have been hacking the video of the secret services torturing activists. And the guy who did it also was jailed. And this has started a huge movement of activists, or not, but demonstrators who have lost an eye, who have been injured, publishing on Facebook, on their website, on blogs, their injuries. I've seen, you know, the mouth broken, the tooth, the eye missing, the body. I mean, I've been observing these images as in relation with the violence of the World War I, except that today these are not anymore researchers' documents from doctors like archives, you know, but like tools for recording the evolution of a repair, but statements. The reason these people have been publishing their injuries, it's extremely complex, but it's a way to address what the state, so-called democratic, is doing to them. And this, they do it because they know that the audience will look at them. But in a very complex, metaphorical way, for me, the representation of all these injuries of different parts of the bodies represent as well the way that the digital economy we are living in today, I mean, ecosystemic society we are living in today, is actually fragmenting our subjectivity. While we here, all of us, we have WhatsApp account, we have YouTube account for those who have Twitter, Facebook. I mean, we are here and we are somewhere else at the very same time. When you do connect to internet, you have an incredible fragmentation of possibilities of entertainment, research, anything from botanic to contemporary art to mechanic to. I think this is the most significant aspect and consequences of this new language that is the digital. It's fragmenting our subjectivity. And the reason that these activists are, and like the Gilets jaunes also, are showing their injuries is that they are illustrating the time that we are living in which we are actually leaking into the others and the others are leaking into us. I'm also talking now and we are connected on internet, you see? So what I think is extremely important in an exhibition like this for me, it's to create a narrative that makes contemporary the injuries of the past. I love this quote by Alphonse Dupron, an historian who used to say, the past is here. And if you look at the Gilets jaunes, no matter you follow them or not, but the way they have been like injured by the police, or in Hong Kong, the demonstrators, or in Chile, in Bolivia, everywhere, the US, of course, there is an incredible authoritarian process that is in march, and which express itself, because it's the last also opportunity, I mean, it's the last possibility for the injured people, through the web, visually, with video, with photos. So for me, there is a correlation between the broken faces of yesterday and injured faces of today, but it's even much more problematic because we are living it now, and it's very difficult to read this. We don't have the distance that we have with the one of the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we live in a time, because you mentioned the correlation of history and this rise of fascism, and I think it's really, I guess we live in a completely ahistorical time also. I mean, it's like, it's so important, as you say, l'histoire est là, that's like the history is here. And, but if we, I mean, like with this constant flow of news on social media and whatever, it's like, I mean, history is kind of missing, no? And I mean, we have talked a lot about physical injuries, but I mean, it's as much of importance or like more kind of psychological injuries, or also the injury as a metaphor for also parts of history that have been denied and neglected, that are also very important for your work. I think also like the new work that you're showing here on restitution.
Yeah.
I think it would, because it's also a history of injuries on another, in another sense. Maybe you can say something about this.
Yeah, of course.
Interest in restitution and about this new work.
I mean, it's here again. It's both very complex and very simple. The reason I've been working on that, it's. Let's say, as an artist, what interests me probably the most is how we are able to build new narratives to reappropriate the silence that has been imposed on many things in history. And not only in history, on the psyche, on the... And I've been, for a long time, more than 20 years now, interested by ancient art from Africa, because I lived in Congo, Brazzaville for 4 years, etc. I've seen masks dancing a few times, but I've seen them, and I've always been, for me, sort of linking the fact that, on the one hand, there was a sort of silence on crimes committed during colonial time, and what I've heard in my own family. It's all about narrative in the end. Every Afro-descendant or people who have parents or grandparents who have been a victim from colonialism, from the war, from a genocide, have two different relations with it. On the one hand, most of the time, people don't talk. Like Boris Cyrulnik told me once. But if you don't talk, you produce then a silence, and then you produce anguish. And then you have also those who talks, but it's very, you have to do a work after that. And for me, it was more or less clear when I was living in Congo-Brazzaville in the 90s that Picasso, Braque, artists from the West have been influenced by aesthetics from Africa. And it was clear, but the way that it worked, for me, has been hegemonic. Until one day, a friend, Cameroonese artist, told me, a collector, French, came into Yaoundé and looked at his work and said, "Oh, it's great. It looks like Picasso."
Yeah.
And then he told him, "No, Picasso looks like this."
The other way around, yeah.
I really love this answer. I mean, we have nice also quotes by Picasso, of course. But I think for me, it was interesting also to just not walking into a vindictive statement of, you have been taking this from us, we need to reappropriate this. Reappropriation, it's not the good term. I've said a lot in many interviews and texts that I used to follow the concept of reappropriation, and then I get rid of it. The day I understood that the real stake is reparation. Because repair, again, is an oxymoron that includes the injury and the repair. And it's handless. Because repair is also the irreparable. So if you want the question of restitution regarding the work that we have here, I really took it like emotionally, because I really love also the aesthetic, not only from Africa, I would say the other aesthetics. I could even quote here in Switzerland some masks that I used in the Jura during some carnivals, object from Japan, object from, which also, by the way, very interestingly, in a very Lévi-Straussian way, sometimes you can bridge these masks from it's the Valois, no? The region where they're from the Valois, to Inuit mask from Canada or North Canada, to Japanese or Chinese mask, which represent, not ugly faces actually, but most of the time heal people.
But these are also like in the collages that you show in the exhibition, these masks, like where you juxtaposition the injured faces from the soldiers with some masks. These are all, as you said, also from different cultures. They are not only African masks there, but
they are from.
But they all kind of express. Because this expressionist element that you were describing before with Jacques is kind of present also in these masks. Like it's kind of the inner, because it's about also like disease and injuries and how you express this through the face, no?
Exactly.
Somehow. And these masks are kind of representing that. So.
It's in that context. I've been also very interested by what means aesthetic. Actually. I'm not talking about beauty or ugliness, but just aesthetic, visagéité, I would say. What means a face? But to come back to the question of restitution, I was, so then I did a couple of projects on restitution. In 2007, there is a project here which I really care a lot, because it's about the collection of the Vatican. Probably one of the most problematic ethnographic collections in the world, because we know that the missionaries were not like, culturel attachés when they were there. It was a bit the contrary. So I've been very interested to highlight a little bit this collection. It's also, I have to tell you something very confident. It's also, I really feel sort of ambivalence also, because these objects, with the missionaries particularly, because I've been visiting the Luigi Pigorini Museum in Roma. I think it used to be a Jesuit congregation mother house, and the Vatican one. And because I like so much this object. I've been looking at them the last 20 years, and really, the way they have been selecting them was super careful. They had been, they have taken the most beautiful masterpieces I've ever seen, especially in the Luigi Pigolini. So here you have this ambivalence, which I asked to some historian like Serge Grozinski, why these people who we know used to practice auto-da-fé, like the Jesuits did, or the Capuchinos did with the king of Congo, who was the first converted to Christianism king, whose son became the first black bishop, by the way, in the 15th century. The Capuchinos asked him to convert the whole people. And he said it's difficult. We can convert the court, but so they said you have to ask them to bring all their objects, their idols. Mm-hmm. So they built 3 mountains of objects, and they burned them. And I got this story by Oliveira de Arroyo in Coimbra, in Portugal, at the Museum of the University of Coimbra, where there is an incredible collection of ethnography. And he was showing me 3 objects, wooden and kisses with nails, incredible object, very dense. And he said, these 3 ones are the ones that remain from these auto-da-fé. They brought them here. So what is interesting here, again, is this ambivalence, why they brought them. So the first reason would be because they had to prove to the mother house in Europe that they need to go back to the region to Christianize these people, possibly. The second reason was purely market, because Cabinet of Curiosity were very early demanding these things. But I'm sure, because of the quality of some objects, of the majority of them, that many Jesuits or missionaries who have taken them, they were extremely sophisticated intellectually, and they really found the beauty of them. Mm-hmm. Really, because, there's no sense that they kept only the very good one, you know. And then I started to wonder about this ambivalence in the question of restitution, which, with Bénédicte Savoy and Felwine Sarr, and the speech of Emmanuel Macron, has immediately traced a line between the perpetrators and the victims. Mm-hmm. I wanted to do a film and an installation where first I want to erase this border. I think this line is problematic because it's also very hypocrite. It's a political line. The second, I really wanted to, because most of the time since Macron did his speech 2 or 3 years ago, we talk about the object, but we don't see them. If you want to see ethnographic objects, you go here at the Ritterberg or in Quai Branly, but there are places for that. I really wanted to question in a sort of conversation the object and the people and what we can say about the object. And for sure, last but not least, for me it was very important to how to say, there are so many layers that articulate our relation with object, not only mask, actually, any object, that I wanted to, through the voice of different stories, to build a narrative that opened a little bit more into this complexity, into the fact that Serge Grozinski, again, he wrote a book called La Pensée Métisse, and I think it's a very important thought, into the fact that, or like Soleiman Bachir Diagne says in the film, these objects are mutant. I really wanted to open a conversation to talk about the complexity of what these objects are today, rather than staying into this sort of, obvious narrative that they have been taken, that they should be restituted, that is for sure, especially those who have been stolen, and from which we have some proof, clearly. I really want that, it's my hope, and it engages only me, but I really want that we understand that one of the biggest problem of colonialism and the way it still exists today is that it has been hegemonized almost also erasing epistemologies that did exist. For instance, the relation that people had with these objects, etc., and which makes today the conversation about restitution very emotional between the people who have the object, the West, the Western world, and the one who don't have it. I really hope that we reopen what we consider as the epistemology of the West, I mean the academia, the university, and we do create departments inside the universities that will work on restitution, exactly as we would work on repair. Because it's an ongoing work. It's not about, we give you 3 objects which were taken by General Dodds in the sack of Abomey, and it's over. This is what Malik Nejmi said, Malik Ndiaye said in the film. We cannot repair what has been committed. But what we can do is really make clear that the dignity of the people who have been, and of the descendant of the people who have been producing these objects, need a space where first they can travel from Africa easily to work in these universities. This is for sure. They should have access to the object of their own culture, that's for sure. But the second thing, I think it's not only this. I mean, like Phil Winsar says in the film, it's not only getting back the object. We also need in Africa to continue to work on them, to continue because they are extremely complex, these objects. It's not only mask and sculpture as we have been like used to watch them and things like that. But Suleiman Bashir Diagne says, these objects are philosophies. And I think he's very right. I mean, the complexity of these objects needs really like a transformation of our way of thinking and basically of our way of teaching and learning and etc.
Yeah, it's just simply not as simple as being black and white and taking like the line. These are the victims and these are the penetrates. So, but I think it's also really interesting about this film is that it is very personal somehow. It's kind of, as you said, I think you mentioned once that after this report of that the Macron was initiating and that was done by Felwinsar and Bénédicte Savoy, that something was missing, that you felt there was something missing after that. And I feel this film is kind of opening up all these personal stories and linking them also to this big story, which is so super interesting, also like having different backgrounds, like this psychoanalyst who is describing herself as being a lost object, which I found super interesting and touching also, and which kind of makes clear that your work is combining this very personal level with this big history and injuries in history, and I think that opens up really a complexity that is super needed, as you say, also in this. What I was wondering is about the objects themselves. Because there you place like 24 or 23 objects in the space, and what is very interesting is how they kind of take possession of the image with their shadows overlapping. They also kind of take possession on the discourse somehow, I feel, in certain moments. And but how did you choose these objects? Do they have a particular story? Because
no, I mean, some of them, but for me it was very important also to, as you say, it's very personal, and but it's also very personal for all it's a conversation with the whole participants, and for me it was very important also to kind of elaborate a trick that even the audience will be tricked into these objects. So these objects are, first of all, it's very important to mention, copies. You have two kinds of copies. Copies that have been made in Africa, that you can find in any market. So they have not been used for ritual. And you have a high-tech, let's say, 3D printing copies in nylon, in acrylic. For me, it's also a debate that I think, I've been asking this question to all the people I have interviewed, if you are not a connoisseur on this field, anthropologist, collector, whatsoever, ethnographic, I mean, working in that field, for the public, it's a kind of, it's very difficult to recognize a real object from a fake object. Because also in the fake, you have an incredible hierarchy. And even within the copy, you can find an object that has an aesthetic which is interesting. But you need years of learning, of looking at objects. You need to love them. Okay. The thing that I found interesting here is, again, it's this video installation has different layers to be in. When you work for a film in, I'm doing a parenthesis that is important. Working in contemporary art, especially with that kind of work, which is a work that could be in any kind of place, you are confronted sometimes with limits like the time. I mean, it's an hour and 18, the film, the size. So you work on the one hand as a filmmaker and on the other hand as a sculptor. You also need to create sort of immediate dialogue that makes that people would see it. And for me, one of the most important things was that I had the impression again that within this debate, we don't see the object. And probably it's good that we don't see them. So film about object with object like Chris Macker and Alain René, Les Statues Marossi have been made. I really wanted to invite the object or what they do represent in the conversation, but with this sort of disturbing, presence, like if they would be judging them. They are all looking at the screen. And even some of them have the light of the projector, of the beamer behind them, so they have their shadow on the film. So for me, this was really a statement to signify, among many things, probably the whole problematic of the question of restitution in terms of coloniality is the silence that has been imposed on the object. And this silence that has been imposed on the object is also the silence that has been imposed on all colonized people. When I'm telling you that artists try to build a narrative, I do not define myself as an historian. But I would not be surprised that historians are interested by such work, because to understand how we can elaborate, reinvent, build narrative, you need to listen people who are talking about very particular, specific stories which can be linked to the whole history. The great history is linked to the stories that are existing in the secret of the families. And if I talk with psychoanalysts, and this psychoanalyst in the film who says that, a relation with object and how does it work, I think it's not by chance. Again, I grew up in a family where during 30 years you never heard about something, and then suddenly your uncle, who I remember there was an incredible moment I think in 1992, if I'm not wrong, during the Oslo Accord between Arafat and Rabin. We were all having a dinner, arguments on the one who were for, the one who were against, who said Arafat was a traitor. And my uncle Ali, who passed away since then, he was a very tough guy. I remember he was hysterical, and he started to shout on us, and we would expect that he would say, yeah, he's a traitor. And he said, you guys have no clue about what the guy just did. This is great. I knew the war. You don't know what means the war. They have killed my father and my brother in front of me, shot head, and I had to carry their bag, the soldiers, during the Algerian war. And I had to carry the bag and during kilometers in the desert. And when they were because they were drinking also beers, when they were drunk, I could escape. They shot on me, but they could not get me. I know what means war. The peace is the most precious things we have to care about. And for me, the fact that Ali was talking about this 30 years after the independence, in this moment, it took me years to work on that. I've been thinking a lot on this sort of, testimony, Yeah.
But did this open up this kind of injury, and your family would talk more after that moment about this their own history or not?
I mean, as I was saying before, the people who have lived an extremely traumatic experience in war, particularly, they don't talk about that. But because you cannot keep it.
So it kind of
comes
this one
out.
Explosion. It came out.
Yeah, yeah. It came out suddenly, and for whole trauma, basically, you know, people are repressing them, and then there is one day when you cannot. And what I found extremely instructive is that he was a very, very super nervous Algerian tough guy. And I would expect that he would say, no, he's a traitor, this is very bad. He immediately said, no, 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 no. What he's doing is right. He's just trying to find peace. You have no idea of what means war, what means this sort of dehumanization of the others. And again, it took me years, because then I was quite young at that time. But it's a story that I think today influenced me a lot in my interest for narrative. For the need for narrative, and that's why I created La Colonie also in Paris.
Yeah, that's also something I wanted to mention. I think these discursive activities, or like to give a platform to these unheard voices, is something that you do in your art, in your sculptures, in your videos. But you had this space in Paris, La Colonie, which I don't know, maybe some of you know and have been there. You were running it for 4 years now, and it's been a very active space where a lot of important conversations take place. Amongst them, also the one video that we show here in the exhibition with Etienne Balibar, with Tony Negri,
and Omar Slaouti.
And Omar Slaouti. But unfortunately, this space had to be closed down now due to, as a consequence of COVID-19. But how is the relation for you amongst or between this political work, or like to politicize and also your audience in this discursive way and the more sculptural way that you're doing? Are you looking for a new space? Will you take up your again your activities?
Yeah.
That's something you plan to do, or?
It was. I mean, you know, I've been working for more than, let's say, almost 20 years on questions that links to colonialism. 10 years ago, it was not that easy. Even 15 years ago, it was like, oh no, these countries have got the independence. You should work on something else. I mean, today it's different. What I found important today is that there is a need, I think, probably is unconscious, for many people is conscious, to share knowledge, arguments in the same space. We look at here. I think it's extremely important to get rid of this sort of digital disappearance that is forced on us, and that has been enhanced with the COVID-19. Yeah. And La Colonie was a place where, first of all, I wanted to build a sort of agora of conversations about colonialism denials, because they were not places. I mean, and then we started to work with different peoples on topics which were not necessarily linked to the coloniality of the past, you know, but much more about the consequences or the continuity of colonial process, or what has been the laboratories of colonialism, like Algeria, and how it continues in today, with police violence, for instance, with systemic racism. You know, you look for a job, when we see your name, an Arabic name or sub-Saharan, they don't even look at your curriculum. When you look for a flat, for instance, all this systemic racism. But what I found important, I have to tell you, is again that slowly the space became packed with anonymous people who were not necessarily, I mean, they were academics, but they were not necessarily academic, and just wanted to take the microphone and speak in a very constructive way, because like we did a whole debate once on the demonstration of 1961, 17 October, where more than 200 Algerians were handcuffed and thrown into the Seine River and died. There were two men. One of them was in the demonstration, and he could escape from these handcuffs, and he was describing us. It was like bringing us back, not only in this moment, but just saying how much he was happy to be able to speak about something that has never been spoken in the last 60 years. And I think, like Prince Guizot is saying in the film of Restitution, the question of the silence that has been imposed to the colonized people in terms of this is not like a major crime, etc., or we should, I mean, completely like pacified, is one of the reasons today, from both sides, the descendant of the colonizers and the descendant of the colonized, to speak. Because you cannot repress the history forever. So, and also especially, particularly again, because they are derivative of this history, the systemic racism and other things. The question of feminism, for instance, has been addressed a lot in La Colonie, and very quickly became addressing the lack of colonized citizen feminist voices into the white feminist discourse. So I've been also, even for myself, learning from Françoise Vergès, from Giovanna Zapperi, from Paola Baqueta, from other group of feminists that they were, Vergès, for instance, did a very interesting researches on decolonial feminism, which I think it's something that you agree or you're not agree, we need to talk, we need to figure out this. And I think the reason I created La Colonie is that there are still a lot of debate that we need to figure out, we need to understand the relation between ecology and colonization. There is a need for a decolonial ecology today because the colonization has been perpetrated during the Industrial Revolution, and the occupation of the lands of the other has been also responsible for an incredible pollution and destruction of the environment, which was linked to a capitalist system of extractions of values that still works today with the financial derivatives. So again, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about reparation, because I think repair is also the irreparable. But there is a need to figure out this publicly into conversation, because you cannot keep this repressed forever.
Well, I think we have talked a lot already, and I think it would be a good moment maybe to, I mean, we could continue, I know, for hours, but let's open also to the audience if there are questions that someone would like to address.
I would like to come back to a question that was, first of all, thank you very much. Come back to a question that was asked before. It was referring to the most recent work, I understand, in the main room that is showing copies of specific objects. I have to say I'm not really satisfied with the answer that you gave. I would like to learn more about your choice of the specific objects that the copies refer to, and the artistic process that, for example, chose not to exhibit any information. I mean, it's quite a heterogeneous group that is responding to the video, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about this process.
No, thank you for reminding me. Indeed, Mirjam asked me about the choice of, and I don't think I did answer. I did not answer probably properly because the choice was not a strategy, don't get me wrong. The topics of artifact from non-Western cultures is handless. And if you start to focus on the Dogon people, for instance, then you focus on a particular part of the history, like I would say, l'Afrique fantôme of Michel Léris, for instance. He's been describing in this book that they were stealing objects, and this disturbed him a lot. For me, it was important to, on the one hand, try to use, let's say, and I invite those who are not connoisseurs to look through the database of some collection like the Quai Branly. From one hand was to use iconic objects. There are a couple of, about 7 very iconic objects from the Quai Branly collection represented here, reproduced actually. And on the other hand, I also wanted to to show object with different origin, not necessarily from Africa. They are objects from Papua New Guinea, from Nepal, from. So I really wanted also to create something that I would say it's not necessarily seductive. You need to make an effort to understand what I meant. We are sharing a conversation together here, and I think it's important to tell you that I like to trick the game by putting copies. But initially, what I would love is that someone start to wonder whether they are copy or not, even if I may so touch them. But at the same time wonder about the origin, the cultural origin of these objects. Because in the debate on restitution, there is a missing link which I think is significant. It's only focusing on African objects. Though we know that artifacts come from all around the world, and particularly from Asia. And we know that here, it's a strategy of I would say, rebuild a dialogue with Africa from the French policies that is losing for years in the profit of China, for instance, with Africa. But it's difficult to talk about all of this. Also, when you, for me, when I work on an installation like this, I'm trying to, of course, not explain everything. I really want that the people like you arrive and start to wonder whether what are these objects? Are there? Is there any reason? Are they iconic? Not all of them. Again, are they real? Are they referred in the film? The people are not referring to the object. The only link, physical link again, is the fact that these objects are projecting their own shadow in the film. And I think this is very important as a metaphor, as I'm trying to do. Are you satisfied? No?
Hello.
Next.
Oh, sorry.
Hello. Hello, madame. Bonjour. Salut, cher Kader. Thank you so much for this great exhibition and this great talk. I have a question, specific question. I was very disturbed by the piece, the hanging clothing on the floor. Mm-hmm. And I would like you, if you could develop, my dear Kader, about this piece, because it was very disturbing for me.
Yeah, of course.
It is, yeah.
Thank you for reminding us about this work.
Exactly, yeah.
For those who know a little bit of my work, sometimes it's very, of course, elaborated in the sense that it took me years to do researches and to like the work we were talking now. And some other, it's a gesture, because I also feel that less is more, that talking about the repair when there is no repair at all possible, but the need of talking about. The need of, I mean, it's a work that has been inspired for me from photographs I did that you can see in the first room, actually, by this youngster waiting on rocks in Algiers to take the boat that we called Harraga. Harraga, for those who don't know, means burned. There are a lot of stories on that, but one guy told me that we have called the Harraga because we burn our ID before we jump into the sea, so that when we get caught in the international water, they don't know where we're from. So one of the, I mean, for me, among so many consequences of these endless extractions of values, destruction of lives that has been perpetrated during colonialism, basically, is the fact that today you have economies and countries devastated. And even more perverse than this, the most intelligent people from there find easily visa to the US, to Europe, etc. But the ones who are less educated, let's say, have no choice than trying a way to escape the misery, I mean, the life that they are living. I don't want to talk too much on this work, but for me, it was definitely, because like all of you here, I've been attending the massive and endless deaths of people taking the sea, trying to reach Europe. This incredible and impossible to understand way that the Western government are dealing with this, as if they are invaders, if they want to take, I mean, no any smart idea of finding a solution. Needless to speak about solidarity, etc. But I'm here, I have to say here that like in few work, I really wanted to use the context of the museum because, I mean, what I found important today in this world where we are like surrounded, I mean, drawn actually by an endless flux of data and information that makes you forget 2 days after the death of people on a beach. This endless flux that makes that incredible info. George Floyd, you go to Lebanon, there is this incredible explosion. I mean, makes that I think we became hermetic to the pain and the call actually of the others. And I think that the context of the exhibition, as long as we still go physically to visit a space, it's an arena where we have to remember how wrong we are also by living in a society and how privileged we are. And we need to address where the media have completely abandoned the fight actually, because now people are doing their own media and then they are filling out the substance of extremely important topics. So this is it. We dedicated one room for it as a gesture. I would love that. Sorry, Mirjam?
Yeah, it's just, I think it is a very emotional work. I mean, me too. I was like, I couldn't, when we were installing it, I almost couldn't bear standing there. And I think this is what we try to do in this exhibition, is kind of this balance between these more discursive works, like the video just before, like on the post-colonial body, where you listen, like it's 45 minutes almost, that you, so time is always an issue. You have to take time to, and time means also you can really reflect more in depth about it, and the museum can offer a space for that today. And this work is called La Mer Morte, so the dead sea, so not like mother, but the sea. So it's you did that like a few years ago, but of course now, I mean, if you read the news also from Greece and also the consequences of COVID on these refugees, again, it's like, it's so topical again, this work. Same as the one, the post-colonial body, where you took this, in this brutal like violence of the French police on Théo Luaka, which of course is the same, we repeating it again and again with George Floyd, but also here in Switzerland, everywhere basically in the Western world. So but it's this kind of balance between these different works that we try to achieve, and yeah, this is, I also agree, it's one, and then I'm really happy that you mentioned it, that because we haven't talked about that one. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, welcome again. I was just considering this image outside the Kunsthaus in a city where after a public feast of 500,000 people, less than 24 hours later, you cannot even tell that a single soul walked through. Your placement is actually, it's an honor in a way for us to remember that there are certain things that can never be swept away. In a city like Zurich, to be placed in the middle of the city, I think is absolutely amazing, and I think that speaks to the wonderful work that you are doing around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Is this live? Yeah. Again, thank you in the circumstances for coming. I'm just curious, I mean, this stimulates a lot of debate, which is great. Has the show or elements of it been actually presented in, for example, Congo-Brazza? If so, what kind of debate did this generate? So has this been taken to sub-Saharan Africa, also for discussion? If it hasn't, are you planning to get a different perspective on the subjects that you're speaking of, appropriation, colonialism, and so forth? Curious for your thoughts.
I didn't really understand the question.
Did you understand? I'm
No,
sorry.
I haven't really understood. Sorry.
So
Maybe
the
try again, please.
The question is, has this show or elements of it been taken to sub-Saharan Africa for presentation, for discussion? If so, I'm curious what kind of debate necessitated. If it hasn't, are you planning to?
I mean, thank you. Indeed, it's a very interesting question. I've been going back and forth in, let's say, many African countries, but probably a lot to Senegal, where I'm also about to go soon. And that's why also in the film, I don't know if you paid attention, the film on restitution, I've been very lucky because of these years of visiting Senegal. There are now friendship between the people. Malik Ndiaye, the director of the museum in Dakar, the Théodore Monod Museum, Sylvain Sankale, of course, Felwine Sarr, Cherin Diouf, Awa. The thing is that I had the chance to show my work at the Dakar Biennale, and I remember it was great because the curator, Abdelkader, another Abdelkader, an Algerian, he told me, "Oh, you always here. It's not for you. For the production, it won't be a problem." And I said, "I mean, it depends. It depends of the idea, but I'm going to try to find something." And I've been working on a project with because I don't know how to weld, so I've been working with local welders. And Ousmane is just a welder having a shop, and then after this project, we became friends. And it's also interesting the way that they perceive my work when they are not from the art world. Because from the art world, obviously, we have more or less the same jargon in the end. But I'm much more interested by the perception that craftsmen or women have on my work. I say a woman because on the restitution, I was also, I interviewed a lot of women who work on embroidery, which is also something I like a lot. And it's a whole conversation of what means art, what means then the memory of art. When you work on memory, what they do consider as a memory. For instance, Ousmane or Awa told me that for them the memory is so important because it's in the head when you are doing embroidery or technique of, I don't know, not welding, but even welding, Ousmane has learned with his father. It's something that has been transmitted from mouth to mouth, most of the time by an elder person. And Awa told me once that this is the only thing that we have. I mean, so that when I have like people from the West looking at my work, which is embroidery on fabrics, it's very famous in Senegal, very delicate. They asked me how to reproduce it, and I said, I don't know. I mean, it's something that is in my head. I mean, so I don't know. And then you have, let's say, to answer probably more completely to your question, I would say the academic, because years ago, I worked on a project called Reasons Oxymoron, which has been researching on the way that madness has been healed in the West and in the non-Western pre-colonial time. And then I went back and forth between Europe and Africa, and I met on both sides traditional healers, but also psychiatrists and philosophers. And I have to say that also this experience was much more interesting with academics from Africa, because I discovered, especially psychiatrists and psychoanalysts, like Léopold Boissy, Jacques-Philippe Salasala from Cameroon, most of them, all of them basically, have this ability that the Western psychiatrists and psychoanalysts, sorry, do not have, or because they don't want, because some of them, like Christine Theodore, has it, to deal with the magical, the unknown, you know, and the reason. And this is really like a step further, the Western, I'm not even talking about psychiatry of medicine, you know, but I think what I've learned about my work, perception by the academia in Africa, was that I was carrying this sort of, you know, not ambivalence, but double ability to dialogue easily about witchcraft, about magic, and about reason. And this is something that I could not dare, because, I mean, the stories of witchcraft, I've grown up with this. I mean, from my mother, my grandmother, etc. But at the school and the university, I was not talking about that in Paris, because you will be looked like a fool. But then when I met highly educated, I mean, graduated philosophers, thinkers, psychoanalysts in a couple of countries, like Moya Malamusi in Malawi too, who is on the one hand ethnomusicologist, and on the other hand working with, I mean, part of a secret society, the Nyao, writing on it. You spend the night talking about witchcraft, about magic, about, and it has opened in my mind other universe.
Okay, more questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much for this great conversation. I have just a question to one point where you were mentioning actually that in this context of repair and restitution also, that actually it's very difficult, complex, that the question of restitution. You mentioned also this new line which has been drawn also by Macron between the colonized and the colonizers in the history, and that actually you criticize this as well. In this context, you mentioned an idea actually which I find interesting when you're talking about that restitution is somehow difficult, but there could also be an idea of making it possible to create more access to all these collections which are mainly placed in the Western society. So I'm wondering if this is just an idea or if this is also a project of yours. Also, I don't know where, on which side, as an artist and as an activist, or somewhere in between.
I mean, to give more access to these collections, it's for me crucial, because not only for people who are claiming restitution. It's just that there's also a nonsense that most of the collection are in storages. So I've met in Ivory Coast Professor Ada Kwasi, who is an anthropologist of probably more than 70 years, and he told me that, look, I have, let's say, I used to have like 40 PhD students 20 years ago. Now I have 5 or 6. People are not interested in that topics because they cannot work on a PhD only on book. And when we ask visa for going to Paris, at Quebranly, I mean, it's not even difficult. It's impossible. So you have all this continuity also of the cynicism, you know, of the situation. That for me, and for Felwine Sarr and Ada Kwasi or Sylvie Memelkassi, the director of the Museum of the Civilization in Abidjan, the access is probably the most important thing. You have to understand that even Quebranly, in the Sylvie Memelkassi, that she was part of a program like 10 years ago of virtual museum. So the Quebranly and other institutions from the Western world were like proposing the idea that people from Africa could, with Google Glass, you know, with Google Digital, could work on I don't know, Baoulé sculpture. So what we are talking about here, I think, it's not the object as an entity, it's the knowledge. It's this idea of being able to work on that. And it became more obvious when Felwine told me in one of the interviews, I was very surprised to be honest, that the requests of the country were super small. Ivory Coast was asking 113 objects. The Senegal, 27 objects. You have to imagine that there are almost, I don't know, 10,000 objects at the Quai Branly from Africa, probably more than, by the way. Iconic object most of the time. Object requested by some communities also who wanted them. But for me, this was clearly meanings that the crucial stake of this question is the knowledge. And then you see here that there is not only a sort of colonization of the knowledge of the other and destruction of it, because we cannot talk about the way they have been described within the Western epistemology, but also a sort of very selfish, idea of keeping the discourse on these objects. And I think this is problematic. I think this is problematic because I spend my time to read the labels, and I've been very surprised sometimes. Very, very surprised. When an object has no name, they put the name of the collector who used to own the object. There's one object that I saw. It was the name of an artist, by the way, also. From the master of Vlaminck. This was an exhibition on Ivory Coast mask, like 4 or 5 years ago. It's really problematic. I mean, if we care about narrative and the reappropriation of our narratives and the way that we need also to listen other narratives, why don't you bring descendants of people from the Dan people, for instance, to just also have a conversation and to work on that? So, yeah. What I was saying before about the need to create in the academia a space for that, I think it's crucial, this, because it will help students from Africa to come to work in that, I don't know, in Berlin, in Switzerland, in Paris, in Europe, to have access to the object, to dialogue with Western anthropologists and people who are working in the museum, but in a much more, I would say, equal way. Because then if you do create a space in a department for restitution in the academia, it will become clear that this is not something we have still a way to delay a little bit, because there's also this attitude now. What Bénédicte Savoy says in the film, it's true. In the beginning of the 80s, the question of restitution was very strong, and suddenly it has completely disappeared from the radar. So we have to be also careful on that it's because of Macron, etc., it's hot, and it will not disappear in the 10 years. Maybe it's done.
Yeah, one more.
Last one.
Yeah, yeah.
Last question?
Maybe last question?
Okay. Thank you. I would appreciate it if you could say something about the post-colonial bodies film. I found it really extremely important.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's important indeed to talk about this because when, of course, I worked on this film, I have been wondering how we can address so difficult topics. We talk about a Franco-Congolese man who is going back home and has been controlled by the police for, there was a sort of movement with some people and he was not part of them. They asked him to control his identity, which is quite common in France, because of your face, of your colors. We ask you the ID. He declined, which I completely understand. And they have been beating him. They threw him on the floor, and 5 cops, heavily weaponized, and he was resisting, like anyone would resist if you think you have the right to resist, because you did not commit any crime. And they have penetrated him in his anus with a stick, a police truncheon. So they raped him, and you see at this moment that he really he collapsed completely. I heard the story when I was at La Colonie, by a group of activists who came and said something very disgusting has happened. The guy, Teoluwakas, is at the hospital. His parents want to speak in the space because in the media, they are all like saying shit about the story, that the guy was a thief, etc. Is it a rape or not? All this blah, blah, denying completely the violence of the act. So we organized at La Colonie a debate where I was personally very touched because there were a lot of young guys from the suburbs and girls from the suburbs, racialized, Arab and black, and you have this incredible tension. I will never forget this. The parents of Teoluwakas were here. There was the philosopher Norman Ajari and another group of activists. So for me, the thing started to become important and to be and the need to address this question when Marine Le Pen actually a year after a CCTV camera was released by a major broadcast showing again 5 cops jumping on the body of a black guy, beating him. And Marine Le Pen says, no, look, the guy is resisting, the cops did their job. I mean, come on. This is a proof that the guy did something wrong. And I started to think, as an artist, you have to address that. So I went to ask to people, what do they see in order to understand what I was watching. There is a moment in the film where Norman Ajari is looking at me and he said, okay, this reminds me the quote by a hip-hop band, PNL. They got the pictures before the records. We got the records before the pictures. The reason that the people do not understand that, because they are not black, they are not brown, they have never been confronted to the police violence. Louisa Yousfi, another activist, she's the one who brought the debate at La Colonie. She's saying, I mean, I've been working a lot with young victims of police violence. There is something that you don't see in this camera, in this CCTV footage, that is in the film, I don't know if you remember. There's no sound. The principle of the whole violence works with the sound. The first comment that the cops is addressing is very violent. In French, we said, on te tutoie. It's also insulting. The fact that there is no sound is also helping to the far right to manipulate this and says, look, nothing is happening. And then other strategies. So for me, it was very important to also dissecate through the voice of Olivier Marbeuf and Amin Khaled, other people, what means how we can link to the whole history this. Why it was important. I grew up when I was a teenager in the suburbs of the north of Paris. And indeed, like Olivier says, growing up in this neighborhood, the racialized people, especially in the 80s, had no choice to become either, player soccer, hip-hop singer, or criminal, delinquent. In all these 3 things, you have nothing but a body that is expressing itself. A couple of years ago, a long time ago, I read a quote by Frantz Fanon who says, as a psychiatrist, every morning you need to ask to your patient, what was the dream, what did they dream last night? The first one, I asked, tell me, I dreamed that I was running in the street and a group of people wanted to catch me. The second one says, I was dreaming I was swimming in the sea and also a group of people wanted to catch me. The third one says, I was dreaming that I was in the middle of a crowd of white people and I was laughing so loudly that they were all looking at me. The fourth one was saying, I was climbing a wall and a group of people with dogs wanted to catch me. And Frantz Fanon said, you see, the dream of the colonized is a dream of muscle. It's a dream of a body that is trying to escape between 10 o'clock and 6 a.m. And this is like something I found again also with a Moroccan psychoanalyst, Jalil Bennani, in a beautiful project called Le Corps Suspect, the Suspect Body, where he's been in charge of migrants in the 70s and 80s by companies who have been diagnosed with nothing, and they were healed. And Jalil says that most of them were not healed, actually. But they had real, symptoms. There was one guy who came one day. I understood this because one guy came one day with a page of a book that he has taken in a dictionary he found in the flea market, representing the human anatomic body. The guy was unable to explain his pain, but he showed a part of the body. He said, it hurts here. You have a correlation between the way that the laboratory of colonialism has consequences until today, on both sides. The fact that 5 people jump on a single body and they are cops, because they have not been, even the cops have not been educated. They think that these black body, they overestimate this black body, like Olivier Marbeuf says in the film. Then they need 5 weaponized people on him, and what they do, they break it, because it's a human body. And this, I don't know when I did this film, 3 years ago or whatever.
2018. But
with George Floyd, this is what is happening. Yeah. And these are the visible things that we can see. We need to understand that this has been processing for a long time, but they were not video, social media, and windows to that. So for me, that's why when I did the post-colonial body, I have to say also that I have been personally victim of police violence 20 years ago. But, so I know what does it mean. But I really don't want also to be into this sort of new kind of vindictive, very superficial statement on Facebook with blah, blah, blah. I think what we need to do is to write books, to create artworks, to do film, and to make them circulate as much as we can, so that we elaborate a little bit the problematic. To make, like Olivier Marbeuf says in the film also, and which I think it's extremely important, he says that it's extremely important to understand that it's not only a state violence that is expressed on this body, it's also a sexual state violence. And then you get into the whole fantasy of the black body and how it has been built within the slavery and then also with the Arab body, because it works the same, especially regarding North Africa and France. So that's the reason I wanted to do this film. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mirjam.
Yeah. So we're back to the injury, of course, and repair.
Exactly.
Issue again. No.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kader.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me just say 2 things at the end. One thing is that all of you who have a ticket now for this talk, you can go and visit the exhibition with a reduced price, so you can just go to the front desk and go and visit. For those who haven't, or for those who have, you can go back, because it's an exhibition that you can go back often, also to see all these videos. Also, I would like to mention there will be another event related to the exhibition, which is on November 1st, which will reflect on post-colonial Switzerland. Something that seems very relevant for me today, because Switzerland still kind of has an amnesia when it comes to the colonial implications, and we have very important Swiss scholars that will be here with us, also a spoken word poet and activist. So it will be a very interesting panel on November 1st. So if you'd like to come back again, you will find it online already. The date and everything. So thank you once again for coming, and thank you, Kader, for this very inspiring talk as always. Thank you.
Thank you.